Sarah had been my best friend since we were 7 years old. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and shared every milestone of our lives together. She was the sister I never had, and I genuinely believed that our friendship was unbreakable. We were inseparable throughout childhood and adolescence. Sarah was always at my house, sharing meals with my family, sleeping over on weekends, and joining us on family vacations. My parents treated her like their own daughter, and her parents did the same for me. We were more than best friends. We were family. Sarah was always the more outgoing one between us. She was charming, confident, and had this magnetic personality that drew people to her. I was quieter, more studious, but Sarah always made me feel special and important. She would constantly tell me how lucky she was to have me as her best friend, and how she could not imagine life without me. Throughout high school and college, we remained incredibly close despite attending different universities. We would talk on the phone for hours every week, visit each other regularly, and plan our futures together. We even talked about being each other's maid of honor someday, and raising our children as cousins. After college, we both moved back to our hometown and got apartments just a few blocks apart. Sarah worked in marketing while I became a teacher. We fell back into our old routine of spending almost every day together, shopping, going to movies, and meeting for dinner constantly. That is when I met David. David was a doctor at the local hospital, kind, intelligent, and everything I had ever wanted in a partner. When I introduced him to Sarah, she seemed genuinely happy for me and welcomed him into our friend group with open arms. Sarah and David got along wonderfully from the beginning. She would often join us on dates, and the three of us became an inseparable trio. I was thrilled that my best friend and my boyfriend liked each other so much. It felt like everything in my life was perfectly aligned. David and I dated for 2 years before he proposed. Sarah was the first person I called with the news, and she screamed with excitement and immediately started planning my engagement party. She threw herself into wedding planning with incredible enthusiasm, helping me choose everything from my dress to the flowers. Sarah was my maid of honor, of course, and she gave the most beautiful speech at our wedding about how happy she was to see me find my soulmate. She talked about how she had watched me grow from a shy little girl into a confident woman, and how David was lucky to have me. There was not a dry eye in the house. After the wedding, David and I bought a house in a nice suburban neighborhood. Sarah visited us constantly, often staying for dinner, and sometimes sleeping over in our guest room when she had been drinking. David always welcomed her warmly, saying that she was family, and that our home was her home too. I was so grateful to have a husband who understood the importance of my friendship with Sarah. Many of my married friends had complained about their husbands not liking their female friends, but David always encouraged my relationship with Sarah and made her feel included in our lives. 2 years into our marriage, David and I started trying to have a baby. It took us 8 months to conceive, and I was absolutely overjoyed when I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. Sarah was the second person I told, right after David, and she cried tears of joy and immediately started planning my baby shower. Throughout my pregnancy, Sarah was incredibly supportive and attentive. She would come over to help with household chores when I was feeling tired, accompany me to doctor's appointments when David was working, and spend hours talking about baby names and nursery decorations. Sarah seemed almost as excited about my pregnancy as I was. She would often put her hand on my belly to feel the baby kick, and she would talk to my unborn child, telling him or her how much Aunt Sarah loved them already. She bought countless baby gifts and was constantly researching the best products for newborns. When my daughter Emma was born, Sarah was at the hospital within an hour. She brought flowers, balloons, and tears of joy as she held my baby for the first time. She looked at Emma with such love and tenderness that I felt overwhelmed with gratitude to have such a caring friend who would love my daughter like her own. Sarah volunteered to help with everything during those first few weeks after Emma was born. She would come over daily to help with laundry, cooking, and baby care. When I was struggling with breastfeeding, Sarah researched solutions and even attended a lactation consultant appointment with me. David often commented on how lucky we were to have Sarah's support during such a challenging time. He would joke that Emma had 3 parents because Sarah was so involved in her care. I thought it was sweet that he appreciated Sarah's help so much. But looking back now, I realized there were signs that something was not right. Sarah had started spending even more time at our house after Emma was born. She would arrive early in the morning and stay until late at night, claiming that she wanted to help as much as possible. She would often still be there when David got home from work, and the three of us would have dinner together like a family. I noticed that Sarah had become increasingly interested in David's work schedule and his daily routine. She would ask detailed questions about his shifts at the hospital, when he would be home, and what his plans were for the weekend. At the time, I thought she was just trying to coordinate her visits to be most helpful. Sarah also started giving me advice about taking better care of myself, and encouraged me to go out more often. She would offer to babysit Emma so that I could get my hair done, go shopping, or meet other friends for lunch. She insisted that new mothers needed time away from their babies to maintain their mental health. What I did not realize was that Sarah was creating opportunities to be alone with David and Emma. I also noticed that Sarah had started dressing differently when she came to our house. She would wear more revealing clothing, spend extra time on her makeup and hair, and always seemed to look perfect even when she was supposedly there to help with housework and baby care. When I mentioned this to David, he said he had not noticed anything unusual about Sarah's appearance. He seemed genuinely confused by my observation, and suggested that maybe Sarah was just trying to feel good about herself during a stressful time in her life. The first major red flag came when Emma was about 4 months old. I had gone out for a girls' night with some other friends, leaving David and Sarah to babysit together. When I came home, I found them sitting very close together on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing intimately. They both seemed startled when I walked in, and Sarah quickly moved to the other end of the couch. David explained that Emma had been fussy, and Sarah had suggested they have a glass of wine to relax after finally getting her to sleep. It seemed like an innocent explanation, but something about the scene felt off to me. I started paying closer attention to the dynamic between David and Sarah, and I noticed subtle changes in their behavior around each other. There were lingering looks, casual touches, and inside jokes that I did not understand. When I would enter a room where they were talking, they would sometimes stop their conversation abruptly, or change the subject. But I trusted both of them completely, so I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid due to postpartum hormones and the stress of new motherhood. The truth came crashing down 6 months later in the most devastating way possible. I had taken Emma to my mother's house for the weekend to give David a chance to rest and catch up on some work projects. Sarah knew about this trip and had offered to check on David and maybe bring him dinner since he would be alone. I decided to come home a day early to surprise David with his favorite home-cooked meal. I stopped at the grocery store to get ingredients for his favorite dinner, and even bought a bottle of wine to make it a romantic evening. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw Sarah's car parked outside. I assumed she was probably bringing David dinner as she had offered, and I was looking forward to the three of us having a nice evening together. I quietly entered through the front door, expecting to find them in the kitchen or living room. Instead, I heard sounds coming from our bedroom that made my blood run cold, and my world collapse around me. I stood frozen in our hallway, listening to my husband and my best friend betraying me in the most intimate way possible. The sounds of their passion, the whispered words of love, and the creaking of our bed. The same bed where David and I had conceived our daughter. But what I heard next was even more devastating than discovering their physical affair. They were talking about me. Sarah was telling David how much she hated pretending to be my friend, how pathetic and naive I was, and how she had been planning this moment for years. She talked about how she had always been jealous of everything I had and how she deserved my life more than I did. David was agreeing with her, saying that he had never really loved me the way he loved her, and that staying married to me was just a convenience until they could figure out how to be together permanently. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Sarah told David that she was pregnant with his baby. She had been planning to tell him that night, and they spent the next hour discussing how they were going to handle the situation. Sarah wanted David to leave me immediately, so they could be together before she started showing. David was worried about the financial implications of divorce and child support, but Sarah had a plan for that too. She suggested that they could make me look like an unfit mother so that David could get custody of Emma. Then Sarah could raise both children as her own, while I would be left with nothing. They talked about how they could document instances of my supposed neglect or instability, perhaps even suggesting that I was suffering from severe postpartum depression that made me dangerous to Emma. Sarah had been researching how to build a case against me for months. I listened in horror as they planned to destroy my life, steal my daughter, and build their new family on the ruins of everything I held dear. But Sarah's plan was even more twisted than I initially understood. As they continued talking, Sarah revealed that she had been sabotaging my marriage from the very beginning. She had been giving David subtle suggestions about my supposed flaws, planting seeds of doubt about my love for him, and positioning herself as the more desirable alternative. Sarah had been manipulating situations to create problems between David and me, then offering herself as the understanding friend who could provide comfort and support. Every argument David and I had experienced, every moment of distance between us, had been orchestrated by Sarah's manipulation. She had even been sabotaging my physical appearance and confidence. The skincare products she had been giving me as gifts were actually causing breakouts and skin problems. The workout routines she suggested were designed to exhaust me and make me look tired and stressed. The parenting advice she offered was intended to make me feel insecure and inadequate. Sarah had been systematically destroying my self-esteem and my marriage while positioning herself as my caring, supportive best friend. But the most horrifying revelation was still to come. Sarah admitted to David that she had been obsessed with me since we were children. She had spent our entire friendship studying me, copying me, and planning to eventually take over my life completely. She had chosen her college major because it was similar to mine. She had moved back to our hometown because I did. She had even been sabotaging my other relationships throughout high school and college to ensure that I remained dependent on her friendship. Sarah revealed that she had always felt that I had gotten everything she deserved: the loving family, the academic success, the social acceptance, and now the perfect husband and beautiful baby. She believed that she was more deserving of my life than I was, and she had been planning to take it all away from me. The pregnancy was not an accident. Sarah had been deliberately trying to get pregnant with David's baby as part of her plan to replace me entirely. I stood in that hallway for what felt like hours, listening to the two people I trusted most in the world plot my complete destruction. When they finally finished their conversation and started getting dressed, I quietly slipped out of the house and sat in my car, trying to process the magnitude of their betrayal. I realized that my entire adult life had been a lie. My marriage was a sham, my best friend was my worst enemy, and everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me was completely false. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by a cold, calculating anger. Sarah and David had declared war on my life, and they had no idea what they had unleashed. I spent the next several hours driving around and planning my revenge. By the time I returned home, Sarah was gone and David was acting like the loving husband he had pretended to be. That night, as David slept peacefully beside me, I began documenting everything I had heard and planning the most comprehensive revenge I could imagine. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I installed recording devices in our house, copied David's phone records, and began gathering evidence of their affair and their plans to destroy me. What I discovered was even more extensive than what I had overheard that night. Sarah had been keeping detailed records of my daily routine, my emotional state, and my interactions with Emma. She had been building a case to use against me in custody proceedings, documenting every moment when I seemed tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. She had also been researching David's financial situation and planning how they could minimize the amount of money I would receive in a divorce. Sarah had been consulting with lawyers and financial advisors to understand how to protect David's assets from me. Most disturbing of all, I found evidence that Sarah had been drugging me with mild sedatives that she had been putting in the drinks and food she prepared for me. This explained why I had been feeling unusually tired and emotional in recent months, and why I had been having trouble concentrating and making decisions. Sarah had been systematically poisoning me to make me appear unstable and unfit as a mother and wife. I also discovered that Sarah's obsession with me went back much further than I had realized. She had been keeping a detailed journal about our friendship since we were teenagers, documenting her jealousy and resentment, and planning various ways to undermine my happiness. Sarah had sabotaged several of my relationships in high school and college by spreading rumors, sharing my private information with boys I was dating, and even seducing some of them away from me. I had always attributed these relationship failures to bad luck or incompatibility, never realizing that my best friend was actively destroying my romantic life. She had also been sabotaging my career opportunities and friendships over the years. Job interviews that went badly, friends who suddenly became distant, social situations that turned awkward. Sarah had been behind many of these problems, all while appearing to be my supportive best friend. Armed with all this evidence, I began planning a revenge that would not only expose their betrayal, but completely destroy both of their lives. I realized that Sarah's greatest vulnerability was her desperate need for social approval, and her carefully constructed image as the perfect friend and person. She had built her entire identity around being loved and admired by everyone who knew her. I decided to expose her at the baby shower she was throwing for herself to announce her pregnancy. Sarah had been planning an elaborate baby shower at an expensive venue, inviting everyone from our friend group, our families, and our professional networks. She was planning to announce her pregnancy and reveal that David was the father, presenting it as a love story rather than an affair. Sarah had been telling people that she and David had fallen in love after I had become cold and distant following Emma's birth, and that I had actually encouraged their relationship because I was no longer interested in being a wife or mother. She was planning to make me look like the villain who had abandoned my family, while she and David appeared as the tragic lovers who had found happiness together despite difficult circumstances. But I had other plans for Sarah's big announcement. I spent weeks preparing a comprehensive presentation that would expose every aspect of Sarah's betrayal, manipulation, and obsession. I gathered recordings, photographs, documents, and testimony from people who had witnessed her behavior over the years. I also prepared evidence of the drugging, the sabotage of my career and relationships, and the detailed plans she and David had made to destroy my life and steal my daughter. On the day of Sarah's baby shower, I arrived with a laptop and projector, supposedly to show a slideshow celebrating our friendship and Sarah's journey to motherhood. What I actually presented was a detailed exposé of Sarah's lifetime of betrayal, manipulation, and criminal behavior. The presentation began with recordings of Sarah and David discussing their affair and their plans to destroy me. I played their conversations about how pathetic and naive I was, how they had been planning my destruction, and how they intended to steal Emma away from me. The room fell completely silent as people realized what they were hearing. Sarah's face went white, then red, then white again. David, who had been sitting in the front row supporting his new love, looked like he was going to be sick. But I was just getting started. Next, I presented evidence of Sarah's drugging scheme, including photographs of the medications she had been slipping into my food and drinks, and medical documentation of the effects these drugs had on my system. I showed the detailed journals Sarah had kept about our friendship, documenting her obsession with me and her plans to steal my life. I read excerpts from entries going back to high school, where Sarah wrote about how much she hated me and how she planned to eventually destroy me. I presented evidence of all the ways Sarah had sabotaged my relationships, career opportunities, and friendships over the years. I had tracked down former boyfriends, potential employers, and friends who confirmed that Sarah had interfered in my life repeatedly. The presentation also included testimony from people who had witnessed Sarah's manipulative behavior, but had never spoken up because they had not understood the full scope of her actions. I showed financial records proving that Sarah had been stealing money from me for years, taking cash from my purse, using my credit cards, and even forging my signature on checks. Finally, I presented evidence that Sarah had been planning to kidnap Emma and disappear with David to start their new life in another state. They had been researching how to change their identities, and had even opened bank accounts under false names. By the time I finished my presentation, the room was in complete chaos. Sarah was sobbing hysterically, David was trying to leave, and several people were already calling the police. But the most satisfying moment came when Sarah tried to defend herself by claiming that everything I had presented was lies, and that I was just a jealous, unstable woman who could not handle losing my husband to a better woman. That is when I played the final recording, Sarah confessing to her sister about her obsession with me and her plans to destroy my life. In this recording, Sarah detailed every aspect of her manipulation and admitted that she had never felt genuine friendship for me, only jealousy and hatred. The recording also included Sarah's admission that she had been planning this scheme since we were teenagers, and that getting pregnant with David's baby was just the final step in her plan to completely replace me. As Sarah's own words filled the room, describing her lifetime of betrayal and manipulation, the last few people who might have given her the benefit of the doubt turned against her completely. The aftermath was swift and devastating for both Sarah and David. The police arrested Sarah on charges of drugging, theft, identity fraud, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The evidence I had gathered was overwhelming, and she was denied bail due to the flight risk. David was fired from his position at the hospital when the administration learned about his affair and his plans to falsely accuse me of being an unfit mother. The medical board also launched an investigation into his professional conduct. The divorce proceedings went entirely in my favor. With all the evidence of David's adultery and criminal conspiracy, I was awarded full custody of Emma, the house, and substantial alimony. David's attorney advised him not to contest anything, knowing that fighting would only bring more negative attention to his already destroyed reputation. Sarah's family disowned her completely when they learned the full extent of her behavior. Her parents were horrified to discover that the daughter they had raised had been capable of such manipulation and cruelty. They publicly apologized to me and my family for Sarah's actions. All of our mutual friends abandoned Sarah and David. The evidence I had presented at the baby shower had been so comprehensive and shocking that no one could defend their behavior or maintain relationships with them. Sarah's professional reputation was completely destroyed when her employer learned about her criminal charges and her history of manipulation. She was fired immediately and found herself unable to find work in her field. The pregnancy that Sarah had thought would secure her future with David instead became another source of stress and conflict. David blamed her for destroying his life and career, while Sarah blamed him for not protecting her from the consequences of their actions. Their relationship crumbled under the pressure of their legal troubles, financial problems, and social isolation. They broke up while Sarah was still in jail awaiting trial, leaving her completely alone to face the consequences of her lifetime of betrayal. Sarah was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes. The judge was particularly harsh because of the systematic nature of her betrayal and the fact that her actions had endangered a child. David moved to another state to try to start over, but his reputation followed him. He struggled to find work in his field and eventually took a job at a small clinic in a rural area, making a fraction of what he had earned before. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life stronger than ever. The support I received from family and friends after Sarah's betrayal was exposed was overwhelming. People who had known us both expressed their horror at what Sarah had done and their admiration for how I had handled the situation. I started a support group for women who had been betrayed by close friends, and I began speaking at events about recognizing manipulation and protecting yourself from toxic relationships. My relationship with Emma grew even stronger as I realized how close I had come to losing her to Sarah's evil plan. I was determined to be the best mother possible, and to protect her from the kind of manipulation I had experienced. 2 years later, I met an amazing man who treats me with the love and respect I deserve. We recently got engaged, and Emma adores her new stepfather. We are planning a wedding that will celebrate genuine love and trust, unlike the sham marriage I had with David. Sarah was released from prison 6 months ago, but her life remains in ruins. She has no money, no job prospects, no friends, and no family relationships. Her criminal record follows her everywhere, and she has been unable to rebuild any kind of normal life. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sarah tried to contact me recently, supposedly to apologize and ask for forgiveness. But I have no interest in hearing from the woman who spent decades planning to destroy my life and steal my child. Sarah made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. The obsession and jealousy that drove her to betray me so completely have left her with nothing but regret and isolation. The most satisfying part of my revenge was not just Sarah's punishment, but the way her own actions had created her downfall. Her desperate need to steal my life had cost her everything she ever had or could have had. If Sarah had simply been a genuine friend, she would still have a good life, loving relationships, and a bright future. Instead, her jealousy and manipulation had destroyed not only my trust but her entire existence. Sometimes people ask me if I feel sorry for Sarah, or if I regret exposing her so publicly. The answer is absolutely not. Sarah spent decades planning to destroy my life, poison me, and steal my child. She deserved every consequence of her actions. And I am proud that I had the courage to stop her before she could complete her evil plan. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about trust, intuition, and the importance of protecting yourself and your family from predators who disguise themselves as friends. Sarah thought she could steal my entire life because she believed I was too naive and trusting to fight back. She learned the hard way that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake of your life. That is what real karma looks like. Not just punishment, but the complete destruction that comes from choosing betrayal over loyalty, manipulation over honesty, and hatred over love. If this story of ultimate betrayal and devastating karma left you absolutely stunned and craving more, you have discovered your new obsession. At Revenge Janet, we specialize in the most shocking, jaw-dropping revenge stories where the most twisted betrayers get exactly what they deserve. From manipulative friends to cheating spouses, toxic family members to backstabbing colleagues. We bring you tales where justice is not just served, but delivered with the most satisfying consequences imaginable. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community of revenge enthusiasts who believe that every betrayal deserves epic consequences. New mind-blowing revenge stories uploaded regularly, each one more intense and satisfying than the last. Welcome to Revenge Janet, where betrayal meets its match, karma never fails, and justice is always served with maximum impact.